Welcome to the Orgasm Hour live Q&A. I'm Dr. Suzanne Malvahill, your host, and here today in episode 4, we are going to talk about how to develop your erotic imagination. So I had a little trouble earlier with my microphone, and hopefully those who want to watch can hop back on. And so what I want to talk about today is first the problem, right? We're going to talk about how um, frustration can get in the way of our imagination, how our thinking can get in the way of our imagination, and what the research basically says about developing imagination and why your imagination matters to your health, to your sexual wellness, and how particularly it can facilitate women who have orgasm difficulty, how it plays a role. So we'll look at the research on that. I love looking at research and I love sharing research with you. I'm really from We're going to look at some research going back into the 1970s. So that's how long ago we were looking at research on developing your erotic imagination. It probably even goes back prior to that, but that's what I've got for you today. And then, how we're going to develop it, basically. So it's why it matters, what the problems are, uh, why it matters, and how we can develop it. And so, first, I want to talk about the idea of using our imagination and use it in the relationship to look at it in the relationship of training ourselves in today's world. So, I want to share with you, if I want to go get a coffee and heat it up, I can do it in about 30 seconds in a microwave, and then I have a hot coffee. If I want to learn how to run a mile, it would likely take me some training, maybe 6 weeks of training, maybe a little longer. I do yoga every day, but perhaps it would take longer than 6 weeks to learn how to run a mile. But what I find is that that many women are impatient with their mind, with their body, and they want the result immediately. So if they use the vibrator and they're not feeling sensation, they're frustrated. If they watched some porn and they didn't feel anything or didn't hear anything, they're frustrated. Um, so if we start looking at orgasm training, orgasm learning as a skill set, we can avoid the frustration that can block our orgasm. And I'm going to repeat that because it's important. If we can learn, I don't even remember exactly what I said because I kind of like just get in this flow mode, but learning to look at orgasm training as a process, not something that's going to happen when you snap your fingers, not something that when you microwave a coffee, it's going to happen in 30 seconds, or when you order something from Amazon, that you could have it at your house in 4 hours. So that's the difference in an orgasmic learning pathway. And if we think about you're developing your imagination as an orgasmic learning pathway, then shifting ourselves out of the critical thinking and the frustration spot, or the feeling disconnected from the body or frustrated with the ability to access orgasm, that we can just quiet all those thoughts and say, listen, I'm getting into an orgasmic learning pathway. So I want to make sure here that I'm good. I had somebody pop on here a minute ago and pop off. Hopefully everyone can hear me well. I'll continue. So all right, so let's take a look at first the neurobiology of imagination and the possible role of this default mode network in our brain. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about the brain research, although it does exist and there is quite a bit of research on the brain. This particular research just basically shares some philosophies about, um, let's see here. It shares some the neurobiology of imagination and the possible role of the interaction dominant dynamics and the default mode network. But what I want to point to your attention here is this: the work aims at presenting some hypothesis about the potential neurobiological substrate of imagery and imagination. For this present purpose, we will define imagery as the production of mental images associated with previous percepts, the imagination as the faculty of forming mental imagery. Okay, so if we begin to understand that we're forming mental imagery, again, and using the analogy of learning how to jog, learning how to run a mile, learning how to swim 50 laps, we don't get frustrated with ourselves when we know we're learning something like that. But we do get frustrated with ourselves when our body isn't behaving the way we want it to behave. And if we can start having some compassion for the body, now that might sound difficult um, for some of you to begin to think about, okay, how do I have compassion for my body? When you might feel like your body has been betraying you, for example, because you're not feeling anything, um, it's going to be a process. And I can just tell you from my own experience, I finally, after 30 years of frustration and feeling inadequate, the broken feeling, something's wrong with me. I can't tell you how many women talk about that and feel that way. It's a cultural residue from it's built into our culture, right? So that's not the topic of today. The topic of today is how to overcome that and how to begin using our imagination, how to develop a practice of using imagination to stimulate your orgasmic potential, your creativity, your creative mind. So let's take a look at a little bit of research of what actually stimulates creativity. Because you might think women have said, "Oh, I've watched some porn, it doesn't do anything for me." Or, "Oh, I've tried fantasizing and I can't stop thinking." Or, "I've tried it doesn't work for me. Fantasy just doesn't work for me." Well, it's the same analogy as if you're trying to run a mile and you tried it for 2 days and you gave up, right? It's the same kind of philosophy. It's not like putting your drink in the microwave for 30 seconds and heating it up. We have to train the brain, train our brain to orgasm, train our mind to learn how to feel into our sensations and into our experiences. So, this particular piece of research I want to share with you here, I'm going to share my screen with you, is a piece of research from a researcher out of Pakistan. His name is Omit Sayin. Here you can see him. This is research from 2012. And we'll just clear it up right now that orgasm is this. Accessing fantasy, going into a fantasy state is also a form of an altered state. And there are things that can facilitate that. And one of the things that actually helped me finally get over my orgasm difficulty was learning how to access states of consciousness with cannabis medicine. And I say cannabis medicine because it's not recreational. It's not like gummy, getting a gummy online or a gummy over the counter. It's looking at cannabis from a medical perspective and getting medical grade cannabis for an issue, just like we would not go if we knew we had problems with our eyes, we wouldn't go get magnifying glasses to wear. We would go see a doctor who would get us the proper prescription for our eyes. It's the similar kind of philosophy of getting medical grade cannabis. So I want to show you here of in his he talks about the uniqueness of different hallucinogens and different all different um, different types of hallucinogens. And I will say that we do know that LSD therapy was used in 1964 to help women when LSD was legal. I don't know about around the entire world, but it was legal in many countries, and it was used actually in the UK in combination with I think it was with Ritalin. I would look it up, but it was something that would calm the mind while they were going on a hallucinogenic trip and unblocking their mind and their body. So what I want to point out, let me go down to this one particular page here where he shows how different here we go. This is a table, and I'm going to share all these tables with you. The effects, and this particular effect here, if you notice, sexual fantasy is highlighted and increases in sexual fantasy. And if you go over here to THC, which is what is in cannabis, the active psychoactive ingredient or the main ingredient in cannabis, it has 4 dots. So it is a higher level. It has the capacity to facilitate accessing um, fantasy and imagination in a way that kind of, I would say, accelerates it if we're in a very relaxed state. That's what that's what has that's what really worked for me in learning how to fantasize. So again, I want to touch on the point of training your brain to fantasize. And we're going to look at now some research on imagination training. So, how do we actually train the mind to access orgasm or access fantasy? Here's a study from 1975, and this was called Imagination Training in the Treatment of Sexual Dysfunction. And it's you might wonder, wow, like why aren't we talking about this now? Right? 1975, we're talking about what, 50 years ago? 51 years. So this particular research was done at a time when women's rights and women's liberation and all of that was going on. There was quite a bit of research going on in the 1970s to help women access orgasm and become more orgasmic, particularly because it had become um, a psychological condition. If a woman wasn't able to orgasm through penetration alone, then some women were given a psychological label. So it was important at this time frame um, to excuse me to be able to access orgasm. Okay, so imagination training in the treatment of sexual dysfunction, again, 1975. And here you can see in recent cases involving dysfunction, the authors have noted in conjunction with sexual behavioral deficits, the frequent deficit of sexual fantasy as well. So uh, they considered it in 1975 as a deficit if a woman wasn't able to access fantasy because she was limited in her ability to access her orgasm or access sexual excitation. And we'll see in later research the role of fantasy on sexuality and the importance of fantasy in helping women become orgasmic. So there were 3 groups that they found of women who struggled with fantasy. The first group, here, if we go to numbers 1, 2, and 3, those who resist initial behavioral interventions because of anxiety or on moral grounds. So, women, for example, who were brought up in a very religious home, very restrictive home where, being good girls and modest and uh, that type of cultural uh, environment. We know that religious teachings and religion in general has shown that it negatively impacts sexuality. Unfortunately, there's plenty of research on that the higher the religiosity in family structure or in a woman, particularly women, the more likely she is to have sexual dysfunction. And I'm sorry to be the one to break that news to you. I mean, perhaps you might find that it's a relief to know that, because if we have information, we can do something with it, that we can make some changes if we know that that's what the problem is. So that's the first group, those who resist initial behavioral interventions because of anxiety. or behavior or moral grounds. The second, those who engage in initial behavioral interventions and experience failure. So that goes back to frustration, right? Women who feel frustration with didn't happen fast enough. I couldn't run that mile in 2 days. I wanted to run the mile in 2 days, but I couldn't do it. I only wanted to train 2 days. That's kind of the same mindset when we think about how learning how to access orgasm. I literally had to put on an entirely new way of being in order to stop the cycle of uh, my orgasm problem cycle of the frustration, hope frustration cycle, we'll call it. Like, oh, is it going to happen this time? And then being frustrated and then trying again. Oh, is it going to happen this time? And then being frustrated. So putting that all down and moving into a place where hope can actually exist because we stopped all the negative associations with our orgasm and with our desire to have it and just moved into training. We just moved into a training mode. I'm going to train for this. So we'll talk about another piece of research in here that has a stop philosophy that when we find ourselves going into that, I saw a post on Reddit and she's just like, I'm just like over it. Like, I can't stand this anymore. When we have those types of negative thinking, negative thoughts, we have to stop ourselves if we really want it to end and really move into a place where we can I'm going to say heal this thing, right? Heal it. So again, learning how to run a mile for most people, especially if we want to try to run it in less than 4 minutes, it's not going to happen in 2 days. So give yourself a break and have some compassion for your body as you begin to shift your mindset into, okay, I'm going to practice orgasmic learning. I'm going to practice some new techniques so that I can give up this old way of thinking and being. Okay. So we talked about the first one, the second one, and then the third, those who succeeded technically at behavioral interventions but failed to reach the desired level of excitation. So they said, okay, I'm trying, and it didn't work the way I wanted it to work, so I'm not going to do it anymore. So those were the three groups that they worked with. And they said here that the initial step involves visualization training. So the this show today is about how to develop your erotic imagination. What you'll see in this research in 1975 was that it wasn't going right into eroticism. It was developing imagination first, not with eroticism. The initial step involves visualization training, and they looked at paintings, different pieces of art to evaluate what and describe what they were seeing in great detail. I find that some of the paintings by Klimt, Gustav Klimt, I have one particular painting in the same painting in both Italy and in the United States in Florida. And I find that to be he loved Gustav Klimt, Klimt, loved art with women and in kind of an altered kind of a state. So it's a really beautiful uh, way to look at art. So start looking at art. This is how this training worked. That's how they started. And then they moved into uh, clients were instructed to read non-sexual but highly graphic material. And it goes through multiple steps of how they taught the client to develop their erotic imagination. But the point of it is it was imagination training. That's the point. So orgasmic learning, imagination training, being patient with yourself and knowing that you can have it, right? I mean, it's like the ability to sleep. Think of orgasm like a function of the body that is innate. It's in our body. If you try to go to sleep after drinking a cup of coffee, some of us are not going to be able to sleep. And so I avoid drinking coffee before I go to sleep or 6 hours before because I want to go to sleep. So, if we know the things that are going to start blocking our orgasm, we can start learning what will open our orgasm. And definitely, one of the things that will start opening the orgasm is stopping the self criticism, stopping the using the stop technique, stopping self criticism. I can't tell you how important that is to stop self criticism. Catch yourself feeling frustrated, feeling impatient, feeling, some women even feel hatred for their own body because they're not feeling anything. And if they look at their body as something that is being directed by their mind. There was a post recently of a woman who um, doesn't ever have signals. Let me turn off the share for a moment. There was a post recently of a woman who doesn't have any signals on when to go pee, to when to urinate. Her body had literally shut that off. And in her post, she talked about how boring it was to go pee, that she did not like getting alerted to the signal that her body gave her of peeing. So, guess what? Her body stopped giving her signals, just stopped. It's like, oh, you don't like this? Okay, then I'll stop. So it was self directed by her mind because she thought it was boring. And so she stopped getting the signals. So in what she was concerned because she started having continual UTIs and infections and still didn't like to go pee, but she had to get out of the mindset to retrain. So this whole aspect of orgasm learning and developing an orgasmic learning pathway, like through imagination training, is something that we can have and we can do. So that's one, is imagination training. The another one here is going to be uh, sexual fantasies. Let me just show you this other piece of research here of sexual fantasies of sexually distressed and non-stressed men and women. So this particular study, we looked at the last study, it was from 1980 and 1975, and this study is from the early 80s. That's here you can see that sexual fantasies are seen as an important source of information and a modality for treatment in sex therapy programs. So while it says here, while While oh my goodness. While drive reduction models view fantasy as a symptom of a deficiency state, cognitive behavior approaches take fantasies as an indication of a successful sex life. So if you're having a successful sex life, then you can have successful fantasies, right? Okay, so that's what this they again looking at sexual fantasy as a way to develop um, your orgasmic potential, your erotic potential, and using a practice to do it. This particular study, this was also this one I really liked, was also from 1975, and it is the use of imagery-based techniques in the treatment of sexual dysfunction. So this was Peter Wish, and he talked about several studies over the past few years have provided ample evidence that imagery can be used to change many types of behavior. And Wolpe, who was a hypnotist back in the 1970s, um, he said, more specifically, the presentation of stimuli via imagination has been found effective in modifying problems of. I have to share my screen with you. Sorry. And I'm starting to wonder if people can actually hear me because I see people are popping in and popping out. Um, I hope you can hear me. But this one here, the use of imagery-based techniques in the treatment of sexual dysfunction by Peter Wish, and several studies over the past few years have provided evidence that imagery can be used to change many types of behavior. And they found that fantasy could be useful in helping people modify their behavior. So manipulating processes that we can actually begin to uh, manipulate the process in our brains of practice and beginning to enter a state where the mind is relaxed enough where fantasy can actually enter and we can be guided. We can either be guided by it or we can allow it to come into us. But when we're tight and tense, it's just not going to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, it's likely not going to happen if we're in a place of self-judgment, or if we're in a place of um, tension, a lot of bodily tension, then it's likely not going to happen. So we talked about sexual fantasies. I want to look at a couple of other things over here. This is a study. This particular study here was done recently. I'm going to share with you the actual an at-home sexual fantasy exercise, and this was published in May of 2026, just a few weeks ago, actually. Excuse me. And it was based on a recent study of a simple. It says here a simple at-home. Here it is. A simple at home sexual fantasy exercise increases pleasure and reduces distress. So it says here a new study was published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine, providing evidence that repeatedly, there's that word again, repeatedly engaging in structured sexual fantasies can improve a person's sexual well being and desire. I mean, isn't that what we all want, right? Researchers found that writing about erotic scenarios a few times a week tends to reduce sexual distress and performance worries while increasing overall sexual pleasure. These findings suggest that simple cognitive exercises done at home can act as an efficient tool for enhancing relationship intimacy and personal sexual health. So, next time when that distress pops up, try writing out a fantasy. Try shifting your mind out of the, oh, this isn't working. When am I ever going to orgasm? I just feel so broken. Am I broken? Stop that and shift to let me write a scene that I would love to experience. That's how you're going to start developing your erotic imagination. And we'll take a look at this study too in a moment. So it says here, human sexual functioning relies heavily. Here we go. This is key. Human sexual functioning relies heavily on where people direct their attention. Attention controls how individuals perceive and process sexual information and in their environment. People can focus their attention externally on physical stimuli, but they can also direct it internally toward their own thoughts and imagination. This internal attention powers sexual fantasies. When people use their imagination to create vivid mental images, they engage cognitive processes that support emotional regulation and memory. In this context of sexuality, these internally generated mental images act as incentives that activate sexual arousal without any physical stimulation. And you might wonder, how can that be? I can tell you there's research, we haven't gone over it yet, related to non genitally stimulated orgasm. Dr. Barry Komisarek out of Rutgers University has done studies, and Dr. Nan Weiss, also out of Rutgers, and Dr. Beverly Whipple have all done research on non genitally stimulated orgasms and how an fMRI connected reviewing their brain shows that a woman who accesses a non-genitally stimulated orgasm has the same mental mental experiences going on as a woman who is experiencing a genitally stimulated orgasm. So that is really, this piece right here is really key, that these internally generated mental images act as incentives that activate sexual arousal even without physical stimulation. It goes on to say that research suggests that a higher frequency of sexual fantasies is often linked to healthier sexual functioning. People who experience sexual difficulties often report a lack of sexual fantasies. So that tells us right now that that's the focus point, right? If you're having difficulty accessing orgasm or difficulty accessing arousal, then shift your mind to accessing fantasy. This particular researcher, it goes on to talk about him. So I want to show you this is the research paper of which that journal or that article we just looked at about the simple at home sexual fantasy exercises. And if you just signed on, it means to write about sexual fantasies several times a week. Start training your brain, just like you would train to exercise or go to yoga. You can train your brain to access erotica and stimulate your erotic imagination. So this particular study was done. This is a different study actually by Pedro Campos. This was done April of 2026. And the role of sexual fantasy on sexual desire, distress, and sexual worries. This was a randomized controlled study. Here we hear again sexual fantasies may enhance sexual desire and reduce sexual distress by redirecting focus towards emotionally salient and arousing imagery. Few experimental studies have tested whether repeated engagement in sexual fantasies can improve sexual functioning, reduce sexual distress, and reduce cognitive distractions. We know that cognitive distractions are a leading cause of orgasm difficulty in women. So, this randomized controlled trial, that means that there was a control group, meaning that some women were given the fantasy to practice and some women weren't. And often it's blinded, meaning one group doesn't know what the other one gets. And here it says here how they did the study. There were 60 adults with an opposite sex partner in the past 4 weeks were randomly assigned to either a sexual fantasy group, instructed to write erotic narratives at least twice weekly, or a control group instructed to write a non-sexual positive narrative about dining with friends. So this is related to that study that we were just reviewing about the simple at home sexual fantasy techniques. So the outcome, what happened, sexual function, sexual pleasure, and sexual distress and sexual worries were reviewed. And here we go with the results. Repeated measures revealed, and ANOVAs is a type of statistical analysis, revealed significant group time interactions for all pre-registered and exploratory outcomes. Only participants in the sexual fantasy group showed increases in sexual desire, pleasure, and partner-focused imagination vividness, along with reductions in sexual distress and worries. So this again goes back to this putting your drink in the microwave and expecting it to be ready in 30 seconds and thinking that our body works the same way. These people, they practiced in this study, the participants. Here we go. And they practiced, they were how long? 4 weeks. So instructed to write a non-sexual narrative. And let's see, in the past 4 weeks, twice weekly. That's it. Twice a week. They wrote something twice a week for 4 weeks, and they had improvements in their sexual functioning and reductions in sexual distress. So we know what the results were. The findings suggest that structured sexual fantasy engagement can enhance key aspects of sexual functioning and well-being by shifting attention from negative cognitive patterns to vivid, emotionally positive, erotic imagination. There's the answer, ladies and gentlemen. The answer is right in front of us. I'm going to read it to you again. Findings suggest that structured sexual fantasy engagement can enhance key aspects of sexual functioning and well-being by shifting attention from negative cognitive patterns to vivid, emotionally positive, erotic imagination. And the conclusion was that sexual fantasy exercises may serve as a brief, home-based intervention to improve sexual well-being. Future studies should examine long-term effects and test applicability in clinical populations. So that is a really fantastic, easy to do process to enhance sexual well-being, reduce sexual distress, um, reduce cognitive distraction, and enhance your erotic imagination. I want to see if we have uh, creativity. If there's something else here I want to share with you, I think that those were the key. The use of imagery, those were the key things I wanted to share with you today. And I hope that this has been helpful, that you can always uh, jot down a question. I get all the questions that come in through notifications on any of on a comment. If you listen to this and want to make a comment and ask a question, feel free and I'll respond. And I am thankful to you for watching. You can access my business, Female Orgasm Training com, and we will be having an upcoming 12-week live private one-on-one sessions with myself and Dr. Janester Wilson King. She's an OBGYN cannabis doctor. It's Becoming Orgasmic with Medical Cannabis. It's a 12-week private program. That will be coming live in the next few weeks. And we're taking up to 15 women for this private cohort to get this particular process started. And I have free pleasure guides. You can also access all my channels at Dr. Suzanne, DrSuzanne, Mulvihill, Mulvehill, on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. And thank you for watching the Orgasm Hour today, episode 4, and we'll see you next time.